Hello, guys. Welcome to one more episode of the BSV podcast series here in Berkeley. And just before I start the episode, I would like to give a little background on BSV. I think I never did this before in the other episodes. So, Brazil Silicon Valley is a movement started by Berkeley and Stanford students back there in 2019. And we have an annual conference that is in Silicon Valley that aims to bridge the gap between Brazil and the United States and bring influential Americans and Brazilians, entrepreneurs, investors, executives, and policymakers here to the Valley. And today we're here in Berkeley and I have a very special guest. He's not only my Berkeley professor, but also the founder of RedOctane. And if you don't know RedOctane by name, you definitely know their game, the most famous game, Guitar Hero. I'm here with Charles Huang. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mateus. Hello, everybody in Brazil.
Yeah, well, in Brazil and the United States, hopefully.
Yes.
So, yeah, Charles, as I said, is my Berkeley professor, but he was also an undergrad here. And then he later co-founded Guitar Hero with his brother. But yeah, I mean, I just like to hear a little bit more about background on yourself, where you're from, your family, where you grew up, your time at Berkeley, and love to hear that.
Sure. Mateus, I was born in Taiwan, moved to the United States when I was very young, 7 years old. Spent most of my years, all of my years in the United States, first 5 years in New York, and then the rest of the time in Silicon Valley. So I was very fortunate to grow up in Silicon Valley and in this area, and including my career here.
Yeah, I know, super nice. And then you came to Berkeley and you did econ and Asian studies, East Asian studies, no? And I think it's a very interesting major combo. Just wondering why did you do that, and yeah, how's your time here at Berkeley at Cal?
Yeah, that's it was an interesting econ and Asian studies double major. My dream actually when I was an undergrad here was to be a Chinese history professor.
Okay.
And then something went horribly wrong and I started making video games. But that was my thought at that time was, and I just liked the study of economics, so I took that. But my goal was at that time to be someday a history professor.
Okay. You grew up playing a lot of video games, or?
I did. I grew up playing, the very first video game console was this Atari 2600. And when we first moved to the United States, my parents bought my brother and I one of those, and I think this was probably like third grade, fourth grade, and I've been playing video games ever since.
Okay, nice. And then you said you came to Berkeley to the econ, East Asian studies, instead of being a Chinese history professor. And then how was after Berkeley? How was going from that to RedOctane or Guitar Hero, or after college, I guess.
Yeah. So. I was here at Berkeley. This will make me sound old, but I was here in '88 to '92, and at that time there really was no idea of people, being entrepreneurs. There was not a culture for that. So I thought about going to academics. Some of my friends just thought about being engineers at places like IBM, and so I thought that was kind of what I was going to end up doing. And then we ran into the dot-com boom a few years later, probably in like 95, 96. The word startup started appearing in the culture. And so that I think had a huge influence. Being at Berkeley, where a lot of people, including one of my roommates, became an entrepreneur, being in the Bay Area, I think all of that shaped the first few years that I got out of college.
Okay, so you graduated in 93, you said? 92?
Yeah, so end of 92,
okay.
I spent 1 year, the two influential things was being in Silicon Valley, and then the second was I spent 1 year studying in China. And those two things, I think, had a huge impact on what I was going to do later.
Okay, that's very interesting. On our first podcast, actually, I interviewed a Brazilian entrepreneur also studied in China. But I was wondering, why do you think studying in China and being in Silicon Valley, this combination was influential for your career after?
Yeah. Well, at the time, there were kind of two separate things. I went to China because I wanted to study Chinese history.
Okay.
But it was also the time where China was just first starting to open its markets to the West. And so it was very exciting to be there, to see that. This was a country where at that time, they had a new phrase, 10,000 yuan family. That means if a family had 10,000 yuan, which was the equivalent of like 1,500 US dollars, you were considered rich.
Okay.
So this is how like 1,500 US dollars at that time. So it was there at the very beginning. So I think that was a very interesting thing to see that influenced my decisions to do business in China. And then just being here, and when I was growing up, listening to my friends parents, when I was going to high school, talk about the things they were working on. And so one of my friend's dad worked on the very first hard drives that were like as big as a refrigerator. Another friend's dad, his company actually made the chips that went into the Atari games that we were playing. And so hearing about that also had a huge influence on what I was going to do later.
Okay, nice. And then in 1999, you and your brother started RedOctane. And yeah, I mean, it didn't start with Guitar Hero at first, but I was wondering, like, how was starting that? Where did the idea come from? Yeah, why is RedOctane? If you could give more background also for people who don't know.
Sure, yeah. Back then in 99, it seemed like, 98, 99 was the peak of the dot-com boom. And it was like everybody had a startup, right? Everybody had a dot-com startup. And so, my brother and I were just like everybody else. We had an idea to do something in video games. RedOctane was started off as a game rental service. Um, those of your audience who are a little bit older might remember when Netflix used to send DVDs in the mail to people. That's what we were doing for video games.
You started right with Netflix, no?
Yes, we started our service within 6 months after Netflix launched.
Okay.
So we were about the same time. And yeah, that was our first idea. And the name RedOctane came from the idea that we were going to, the red stood for revolutionize entertainment delivery, because we were delivering games. And yeah, and so that was our first idea that we thought of back in 1999, back when it was everybody had a startup idea. And I used to joke, if your idea was, everybody had a PowerPoint. If your PowerPoint was, you could raise $1 million if you just had any PowerPoint. And if your PowerPoint was any good, you'd raise $2 million. Like that was the kind of the times.
Okay, and you raised money with that.
Yes. Yeah.
So you had a good PowerPoint.
Yeah. Well, we raised 1.2, so maybe not.
Okay, not as good. That's good.
Could have been better.
Yeah, and then you raised 1.2 million in 1999. But then in what, April 2000, you have the dot-com bubble, no?
Yes.
So how's having a startup there? How's having a company there running, thinking of raising or thinking of like going on business?
Oh yeah. That was the worst timing probably to start a company, right? 6 months after you start, the whole internet economy just imploded. And it literally looked like at that time that no VC was ever going to invest in another, especially consumer startup ever again. And so it was a horrible time for us 6 months into our company. The good timing of it for us was because we started so close to the bubble bursting, we didn't have time to raise a lot of money and scale our operations up and have huge expenses. So the fact that we were early, still small, allowed us to survive through more traditional methods of generating revenues and profits. And so it was good and bad that it hit us, but it definitely was a lot of very nervous nights when the dot-com bubble burst.
How many people, or is like only you and your brother?
It was my brother and I started it. We had probably at that time recruited 3 or 4 other people. So we had built a simple website. We had bought some game disc inventory that we were shipping to people in the mail. So it was a very small operation. So we were able to survive. Partly, we saw all these other companies, bigger companies that we really admired, who had hundreds of people and had raised tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, and they all just went out of business over the next couple of years. And for us, it was lucky we didn't get to that size, or else I think we couldn't survive.
And then did you continue shipping video games, or until like what it didn't?
Yeah. So that business wasn't really going to work if we weren't getting investors.
Okay.
The basic idea was like, you pay us $20 a month and we ship you 3 games. And when you finish one of them, you send one back and we send you the next one on this queue that you had. But the basic economics was, you pay us $20 the first month, we ship you 3 games. Each of those games cost us $40 wholesale. So we ship you $120 worth of games and you pay us $20 in the first month. And after 6 months, we recoup it all and it becomes profitable. But you can imagine if 1 million people signed up tomorrow, we didn't have the money to send them all 3 games. So that was the basic flaw with our business model once investment stopped. So we had to change. And that's when we started discovering some of our audience were playing music games, especially Dance Dance Revolution. They asked for dance pads, and so set us off on a whole new trajectory.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, let's talk about like the DDR, Dance Dance Revolution, and the dance pads, and how you guys started doing that, if you could. Yeah. Explain more about that. It's very interesting.
So, at the time it happened, the sort of 99, 2000s, there was a series of music games in Asia particularly in Japan, that were hugely popular. And the most popular was a game called Dance Dance Revolution. It was a game you played with a dance pad, you stand on it, and you jump up and down on these arrows.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun with the dance pads and not really much fun with a game controller. So we had people who were renting that game from us and then asking us, hey, can we get the dance pads? And that's when we had the sort of light bulb moment for our first pivot was like, okay, maybe we should sell them dance pads. And that sort of selling dance pads set us off for about 3 years on a path where we could still be a small company, but be profitable.
Okay. And I know you started selling dance pads, but then you also start manufacturing them here, no?
Yes.
After a while, so
Yeah.
that's the...
So the funny thing was when we started, we were just buying dance pads off what we call off the shelf. Like these were manufactured in China, and then we just bought them from Chinese factories. And that was partially my experience studying a year in China helped me be able to figure out how to do that. But these dance pads were just garbage. Like they would break down after a couple of uses. People were returning them a lot. And so we started manufacturing basically by taking the ideas that our consumers gave us. And then I went off to China and we started having the factories put in all the changes that our customers wanted us to put in. And that made our dance pads better. We sold more. We were able to sell them at a higher price for higher margin. And it set us on this path of selling video game accessories, mostly dance pads. And that saved the business through the dot-com bust.
Okay, and then you did this dance pad until when you were in the dance pad business and...
Yeah. So basically that was our business from about 2000 till about 2004. We were very small scale. I think 2003 we did maybe 850,000 that year in business in revenues. The year after we did 3.2 million. So it was a very small scale business, but the dance pads were high margin for us. So we just kept growing that business. And then in 2004, we made our first sort of, or second pivot, minor pivot, which was since we were making dance pads, we thought, okay, maybe we should make a dance game. And we found a partner and made a dance game called In the Groove. And then now we were in the video game software business.
So you started with hardware and then you guys developed the hardware and then you found a partner to the software?
Yes, there was we found a partner in Austin, Texas that had made a dance game for the arcade, the big arcade cabinet. It was called In the Groove. And then we worked with them to port the game to PlayStation 2 and packaged it with our dance pads. And that became our sort of first video game that we made.
Okay, and that was profitable. You guys were surviving with it.
Yeah, so it was a very small budget. I think our budget for that game, because the game was already developed for arcade and it was just porting it to PlayStation, our budget was like 150,000, which is
very small for you.
Yeah, peanuts for a video game.
Okay.
But we did it and we shipped the game and it took us from about $3 million a year in revenue to about $9 million. And so it expanded our business greatly for a tiny investment. And we also learned how to make video games.
Nice. And then after the first VC round, you never raised again. We were just...
Yeah, that first round was just friends and family. And so we had not been able to raise money since then. And so we were just surviving month to month on profits from the sales of dance pads.
Okay. And you said that's until 2004, no? The dance pad?
Yes. And then we made the game In the Groove.
In the Groove. And then 2005, you guys have Guitar Hero. So...
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could go more in that, I mean, I guess that's the big hit, no? But tell the story where the idea came from, you and your brother, the Texas guys, or everything.
We had this, we made this game In the Groove, and on $9 million, it made us enough money that we thought we could do a second game, and we had met another developer in Boston called Harmonix Music System, and we had met them before, and after we made In the Groove. Ran into them again and started talking about, hey, maybe we can work together. And we said we had this idea for making a guitar game. And they said, that's funny. We've had, been thinking about making a guitar game. And so we got together very quickly, came up with the concept for a guitar game called Guitar Hero and set off to work on that in 2005. The budget based on the profits of our dance game was also small, 1.75 million, which is still for a video game. Even back then, it was a small budget, but it was a big step up for us from the first one.
Yeah.
And so we set off in early 2005 to start working on this game called Guitar Hero.
Okay, and where did the guitar idea came from? You said both of you guys had the guitar idea at the same time.
Yeah.
Came together, but...
So in those years, what had happened in Asia was the music game genre started to expand into all kinds of other art, mostly in the arcade. So there were drum games. There was a guitar game called Guitar Freaks, a game called Drum Mania. This company called Konami made a bunch of them. Korean companies were making games. And we saw a lot of this, and we played a lot of them in our offices. But our thought was always the guitar was interesting because in the West, especially in the US, there's such a history of rock and roll and metal. And we thought, oh, if we're going to make a game for the US market, and that was our goal, was always think about how can we make music games popular in the West. And we thought like, oh, it should be about rock and roll and metal. And if it's about rock and roll, it should be based around a guitar. And that was the very rough concept of what we were.
Okay, no. And I mean, it's very interesting you said that because, yeah, as you said, you wanted to make music games popular in America. And how was doing that? Because I mean, I think it's the first like big music games, Guitar Hero or even the dance pads. But like you said, it's a big thing in Asia, but wasn't in America. And why? I mean, why was big in Asia and why wasn't big in America? And why'd you guys thought like saw an opportunity there? Like, how come did that happen?
Yeah. So that was one of the things that I think I feel very proud of in our history was that we kind of went all over the world to see just different trends in video games and kind of came across this one in Asia of music games. But the music games that they were making in Asia, in Japan mostly and some in Korea, were very much for the Asian audience. So the songs were kind of J-pop. It was a random list of songs: J-pop, jazz, classical. Didn't have a theme to it, but these were sort of random songs. And sometimes like you were holding a guitar, but sometimes you were playing the drum track. Sometimes you were playing the vocal track. Sometimes you were playing the guitar track. So there wasn't a kind of, I didn't feel like a coherent theme to it. And so our thought was, well, first we need to have songs people in the West recognize, and we made a rock metal. And we thought everything in the game should be about rock and roll and metal culture. The characters in the game, the graphics, the song selection should be rock and roll and metal. And so that was part of what we set out to do. And I would say our big breakthrough was that, we didn't think about it as playing guitar. We thought about it as making you feel like you're a rock star, right? Yeah. The illusion of being a rock star. And so I think that was our breakthrough. Once we sort of came across that, the whole project just came together.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very cool. So then you start producing Guitar Hero in early 2005, and then you launched what, November 05?
Yes, yeah, the game launched officially in November 05.
Yeah, and then there's the story about I think it's called E3,
yes.
the fair. Like,
yes,
that's a very funny story.
Yeah,
it's taught in class 1, so that's how I know. But if you want to talk about the story, and then
yeah, of course. So the funny thing was the E3 it stands for Electronics Entertainment Expo. So it's the biggest video game trade show every year in the United States, in North America. It takes place every year in Los Angeles. So we went down there to show the very first prototype of Guitar Hero. And so we came in with our prototypes that were flown directly in from China, and then Harmonix, and then came in with the software, the first software builds from Boston. We hadn't tested it yet, and we were hoping like, oh, I hope everything works when we put it together. And luckily for us, it worked when we got to LA. And so we showed it behind closed doors, like in a little meeting room, kind of
this room.
like this one, yeah, where we showed it to journalists.
Yeah.
And amazingly, some of them started writing like, wow, this game could be the most fun game of this year. And so it was hard to believe for a tiny little company. We were sitting in like the basement of the big expo hall, and people would like walk in. The journalists would come in and say, "Are we in the right place? Are you showing us a video game here?" And they didn't quite believe what they were seeing. And somehow we started winning awards out of that show, and that gave us a huge amount of momentum coming out of E3.
Okay, so you said the first time, I didn't know this, the first time you tested both software and hardware together was at that fair?
Yeah, we had not been able to test it because everything was like right up against the deadline.
Yeah.
Until we hit the showroom floor.
And you just hoped it's going to work out.
Yeah, we were just praying, like cross our fingers, like I hope everything works when it goes.
Okay, and when was the fair? Like
that usually is like kind of late May. And so in May, when this all happened, and then they started to write.
So that's before you launch.
Yes, yeah. So like E3 happens in the summer, and it gives you a preview of what will be released at the end of the year in Christmas.
Okay, nice. And then after that, I mean, after all that buzz, how was like the release with I mean, yeah, how was like producing everything, selling to retailers, selling the Christmas season? How was that?
Yeah, so we came out of E3 in May with this momentum, and then I went, in the summer we went and pitched a whole bunch of retailers, Best Buy, Walmart, GameStop, all those guys, and we could only get two retailers to agree to carry the product. It was GameStop and Best Buy. That was it. Nobody else was interested in Guitar Hero, but we thought,
Right.
okay, we have two, and that's good enough for us. And then we set out in September to, we started manufacturing the guitars. We needed some money to pay for that because we had to pay the factories first, and then they would ship us the guitars. So we tried to raise $3 million from VCs. We had this game that was built, finished, and it was winning awards. We tried to raise $3 million. We couldn't raise a penny.
Not a good PowerPoint.
No, yeah, I thought like, oh, the games are good, and people actually loved the game. And some said, you're going to go out of business trying to sell this game. And so we came into that fall with sort of, on the one side, a lot of momentum in terms of like the press and people talking about the game, and like zero momentum in the business and financing. Like only two retailers agreed to take it. People wouldn't invest in it. And so it was a kind of an interesting time for my brother and I as we looked to launch the game in November. When we couldn't get any investment, we said, well, we have to launch this game and we have to figure out how to finance this. And so that was when my brother and I said, well, we'll just borrow money. And so we kind of maxed out the credit cards. I went home to talk to my wife about taking out a loan against our house so we could pay for the inventory for Guitar Hero. And at the time, we had two young kids. And she said, well, where are the kids going to live if this game doesn't sell? And the best answer I had at the time was, I think the game will sell. and luckily, I have a very supportive wife. She agreed to let me do that. And then we did it. And that was how we paid for the inventory for Guitar Hero.
Okay, no, that's amazing. True skin in the game.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So then you paid for the inventory, and then how was the Christmas, when you launched November and the Christmas season in 2005?
Yeah. So crazy. The first day it came out, Best Buy had originally given us a forecast that they thought they could sell 30,000 units that Christmas season. And Christmas season is like, this usually November, December, January, right? And so they said we can sell 30,000 units. And then the first day, around noon, I got a call from the buyer at Best Buy. I said, we sold 3,000 units in the first 2 hours. We need 80,000 units next week, right? So it went up from like 30,000 units for 3 months to like 80,000 units next week. And I had to tell her like, oh, sorry, you don't understand. Like, these guitars are made in China and they come over here on a ship. And next week we have 5,000 units coming in, and you have to split that with GameStop. And so it instantly became sold out everywhere. And I always said the dirty secret of why it was sold out everywhere was because we had no money for inventory, right? We kind of borrowed all the money we could, and we bought as much inventory as we could, but it just wasn't enough to meet demand. And so it became the hardest game to find that Christmas. And so luckily for us, that launch went very well.
Okay. Did they increase the price a lot, the retailers, on the game? Or
So it was funny. I think GameStop did increase it $10. At that time, most games sold for $50. And then we priced Guitar Hero, if I remember right, we priced it at $60. And they just on their own raised it to $70 because there was so much demand. And it was still selling out everywhere. So we didn't increase it, but the retailers did.
Okay, nice. And then after that, after that Christmas season, how's like the beginning of 2006 for you guys? And how's it going forward from that?
Yeah, so the interesting thing was the game is sold out everywhere in December. And then usually what happens in January is they publish the sales data from December. And that's the critical Christmas month of sales. And so when the sales data came out in January, Guitar Hero turned out to be the second best-selling game of December. Now, everybody in the industry knew that if we had any inventory, we would have been the best-selling game, right? We were number 2 because we didn't have any inventory.
What was number 1?
I don't remember exactly. I want to say it was probably Madden football.
Okay.
Usually, like, it is. Because this was before Grand Theft Auto, I think, became huge. We came into this, and they sort of came in as soon as everybody saw the sales data. we started getting calls from investors again. And in fact, within probably a month after that, we had 2 private equity firms that offered to invest $30 million each in our company. And I remember telling to my brother and saying like, wow, that's crazy. Like 4 months ago, nobody would invest $3 million. Now we have 2 firms willing to invest $30 million. And so that was, I say, what happens when you have a hit in a hit-driven industry?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why the VCs didn't want to before, because hit-driven industry. And that's why
Yes.
they didn't want to. But it got the hit.
Yeah. Yeah. Once we had a hit, everything changed.
Yeah, and then you didn't take that money from the P's, but you sold for Activision in 2006. And I was wondering, how was the process, and why did you decide to sell instead of like taking the money and growing the business yourself?
Yeah, there was it was a funny timing. Literally, the first day that one of the term sheets came over, we got a call from Activision, and they invited us to go meet with them down at their headquarters in Santa Monica in LA. So my brother and I went down and met with the CEO and chairman of Activision, who said like, "Hey, we'd be interested in buying the company if you're interested in selling." And we had never, like thought about that, but through the negotiations, they eventually made an offer at the time for $150 million. We had a person who was on our board at the time. He was the former CEO of Take-Two Interactive, and so he had a lot of experience in M&A. But his name was Kelly Sumner, and Kelly told us, I think most importantly, this life advice, because we had the idea with Kelly that we were going to take private equity investment, and then we were going to push for an IPO. And Kelly said to us, he said, you two, my brother and I, like, you have no money, right? He said, he meant Kelly, like, I have money, but the two of you don't have any money. And so if somebody is willing to offer you life-changing money, he said, you should probably take this, because while we may be able to push this to an IPO, it's not certain. And there's a lot of things that have to happen between now and then. And so he said, if somebody is willing to offer you life-changing money, my advice to you is to take it.
Okay, and he took the money.
Yeah, and so we accepted. So and closed the deal in June, literally June 6, 2006. 666, as we remembered it, was the day the deal closed.
Okay, and then you kept working on Guitar Hero after you sold for Activision, no?
Yes.
And yeah, how was that, like, working for the company you founded, but like that's not your company anymore? Like how was that part?
Yeah, it was a big change to go into a public company. I would say there were 2 very interesting things about it. One was we first learned what it's like to be, we had done nothing but startups our whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned what it's like to be in a public company, which was a fantastic lesson. Very difficult, challenging lesson, but it was a fantastic lesson. Like the first week the deal closed, the controller of Activision flew to our offices. He had these 2 big binders. And he said, this is Sarbanes-Oxley, like, which is what they have to, these laws that govern US companies that are public in the US stock exchanges. And he said, we have to make sure that you guys are Sarbanes-Oxley compliant between now, which was June like 6th or 8th, to the end of the month, because that was when the quarter closed. So he said, we have 3 weeks to get you guys Sarbanes-Oxley compliant. And there were 2 huge binders about compliance. And so we were like, as soon as the deal closed, we were sprinting, like, okay, we got to get this thing all done. But the public companies, we learned what it's like to report quarterly earnings, to work on what we call the 13-week sprint, right? Because it's like every 13 weeks you report earnings. And so we were on this cadence of 13-week sprints. And the way Activision did things, especially in the sales and marketing departments, they were brilliant. So we learned a ton in there, very difficult, challenging times. But it was also, we scaled up on the production side. That was the second thing that was huge. We went from sort of one development effort to suddenly they taught us that we have to do what they call simultaneous international multi-platform release. We have to go global, and we have to be on every single platform possible, all on the same day. So all of a sudden we went from like 1 development team to 7 development teams, all working on different platforms, all pushing for the same ship date. And so there was a huge amount of learning that we had to do to make those 2 things happen.
Okay. And now, not on the business side, but more like on a personal side, how did it feel to like build a company and, like, as you said, you can't raise $3 million in November 2005, and then
Yeah.
6 months later, 8 months later, you're selling $450 million. How did it feel like all of that going so fast also for you?
Yeah, it was crazy. My, my brother and I were chatting once. I said, 9 months ago, nobody would give us 3 million. 4 months ago, somebody was willing to give us 30 million, and now somebody's willing to give us 150 million. This is all kind of crazy. Um, but it was, frequently in certain industries, right, where you have this like sort of tornado effect up. Things happen so fast that you don't really have time to think about it that much. It just happens. And so for us, we kind of ran into one of these where suddenly we were thrust into the spotlight, became this, in terms of financially, in terms of people watching our game. I always joke, sometimes we forgot, like the week after we released Guitar Hero, the sign to our front entrance just disappeared one morning. And somebody said, "What happened to our sign?" And then someone else said, "I think someone stole it." And somebody said, "Why would somebody steal our sign?" And it said, like, maybe we have fans. And we thought, like, oh, maybe somebody wanted the RedOctane sign. And so a lot of things were changing. But on a personal level, too, sort of selling a company, going through that. There's this huge ramp up of learning. Like, I didn't grow up with, a ton of money. My parents were very much like immigrant, kind of immigrant working class people. And all of a sudden learning how to manage money, learning how to sort of interact with other sort of successful entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley was a whole new thing. We were this little company that nobody ever wanted to talk to, and then all of a sudden we made this game and we sold the company, and now VCs were coming to talk to us, and all sorts of other people came to talk to us, and it was like just overnight. It was just kind of like what happens in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, I know. I bet your wife was happy you took the loan on the
Yeah,
house.
yeah. She was happy. I think we could just pay the loan back, and we didn't lose
Yeah,
our
okay,
house.
okay.
And somebody asked me, like, this was a funny question. Somebody asked me once on this radio interview at the time that it happened. Said, like, um, what did you buy when you first sold the company? And I said, well, I play the piano a little bit, just tiny little bit. So, uh, um, I bought on the advice of a friend. He said, you should spend money on something that is totally irrational, but do it once so you can get it out of your system. So I said, I went and bought this huge Steinway piano that didn't even fit in our house. And then so the guy on the radio asked me, like, didn't fit in your house. What did you do then? And I said, well, I bought a bigger house.
That's a great idea. That's
Yeah.
a good way to spend the money. And I mean, yeah, talking about money, and I think you said that the reason you sold is because your M&A, Kelly, no, the M&A
Yes.
guy on the board, told you that, like, if someone offers you serious money and you have this opportunity, like, take it. But I mean, I think Guitar Hero was what, the top 5 franchises of all time, top
Right.
1 selling game from like 8 consecutive years, and 150 million doesn't seem that much money.
Right.
So I was wondering, like, not if you regret, but like, how was that exit, or like, if you feel like maybe you could have got VC money, P money, and like did something bigger, or maybe just reach those levels because of Activision's resources. I was just curious about like the
Yes.
whole
Yeah.
exit.
So one of the things I learned in that time was fascinating was most times things don't end financially, right? When you sell the company, because most companies, especially then, gave you mostly stock. So Activision gave us a little bit, out of the 150, only about 20 million of it was cash. The rest of it was stock paid out over time. And so we had Activision stock. So you transfer your risk, in our case, from RedOctane stock to Activision stock. And so in our case, we were very fortunate. Activision stock tripled in the time we were there. And part of the reason it tripled was because of Guitar Hero. Guitar Hero was Activision's first billion-dollar game. We were the second game in the video game industry to cross $1 billion a year. World of Warcraft was the first. We were the second. I think a year after we did it, another Activision game called Call of Duty came out with Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and they crossed $1 billion. And so on the strength of Guitar Hero and Call of Duty, Activision stock kind of tripled, and then emerged a Blizzard, and Blizzard, which makes World of Warcraft. So all of a sudden, all 3 games that were doing $1 billion a year came under one company. and so the stock kept going up. So we were very fortunate in the sense that we sold our company for 150 million, but we got mostly stock, and that stock kept going up.
Okay.
And so I don't regret financially. Like, could it have been more if we had taken the PE money and kept going? It was definitely possible, but I don't think it would make a difference in my life.
Sure.
But I think the only regret that I had was 4 years later when we eventually left the company and tried to start up a new company. I realized that like, wow, everything that I had spent building up, I lost it. Like I have no more team, I have no more customers, I have no more vendors, right? All of that is gone, and I have to rebuild it all
From
again.
zero.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that was much harder than I ever expected.
Okay, that makes sense. And I mean, I think you said something interesting. You said that the only like $1 billion games at the time was Guitar Hero,
right.
World of Warcraft, and Call of Duty.
Yes.
And I noticed that like it's the only game that's non-violence, like non-war,
Right.
it was like the only game that wasn't like about it. So like, how was that? I was doing.
Yes.
I mean, I think we talked a little bit about doing a music game, but yeah, I was doing a game that was not about violence and getting $2 billion.
Yeah,
in sales.
it was. It was also it was an interesting time because at our peak was also, I think, when GTA was starting to really come in, and that was super violent, and Call of Duty, of course, is a shooter. Our game probably had the highest percentage of female players of any game, because you can imagine like Grand Theft Auto, even World of Warcraft, Call of Duty, they're not really, those are for mostly men. We had the highest percentage of usually female players. And then the other thing that we had, Best Buy gave us this interesting stat. They said almost 15% of everybody that bought Guitar Hero also bought the console, PlayStation or Xbox, which meant that like 15% of them didn't play video games before Guitar
Okay.
Hero. So we were, a lot of people said you guys were responsible for pulling a lot of new gamers at that time into video gaming. So both of those we were very proud of, that we made a game that was for kind of non-gamers, and we made a game that expanded the market.
Okay, very cool. And I mean, do you have any fun stories, talking more about like, I guess, the music side of the gaming side, but any fun stories with like artists, partnerships, bands with Guitar Hero? At
Yeah.
that time.
I mean, we had huge intersection with the music industry, and that industry is crazy. Like, it's as crazy as everybody thinks it is. But I remember this was for Guitar Hero. I think it was for the fourth one. But anyway, we every week we'd have a meeting with the music licensing team, and they would tell us about artists, songs that had cleared licensing that we were okay to use. We put out a lot, huge list of songs. We send them to the labels. They have to ask the artists to see if they'll allow their game or song to be put in our game. So there was a whole process. But one week we were on a call, and the licensing team said like, hey, one of the labels pitched us this new artist, and we have a chance to work with her. Her name is Taylor Swift. You guys interested? And I remember being on the call. The first question somebody asked was, who the hell's Taylor Swift? And I remember hearing her song. This was around the time where her song Love Story had just started to play on the radio. So it was one of her first kind of hits. And so I said that like, yeah, I think she has a song on the radio now called Love Story. And luckily for us, like we said, yeah, sure, we'll look into it. And we ended up working with her a couple of years later. She did some TV commercials, had several songs featured in our game. But I remember when we started, like there was a lot of interesting kind of impacts that we had on the music industry, as well as the music industry obviously had a huge impact on our game.
Yeah, makes sense. And how was that? I mean, I guess when Guitar Hero was famous, it was like easy to license music, but how was like that licensing in the beginning, or like no one knew you guys?
Oh, the beginning.
Or you just didn't license it?
Yeah. Well, no, the beginning was super hard because the very first one was hard because we didn't have a game finished yet, so we couldn't show them anything, right? We'd say, we want to license your music for a game called Guitar Hero. And then when the artist would say, like, what's Guitar Hero? We had nothing to show them, right? We just had ideas to talk about. So it was very difficult. That's why on the very first game, nobody gave us their original recordings because the game could have been garbage. So if you looked on it, there was only, I think, 2 songs that were originally recorded by the artists themselves. Everything else we had to re-record. And they would never give us their best songs. They would always give us like the 3rd or 4th best songs, because nobody wants their music to be associated with a crappy game, right? And so I don't blame them. But we got all these like third, fourth best songs, and then we had to re-record them in studio to make it kind of sound like the original recording. And that was our Guitar Hero 1 experience. And then from there, it gradually expanded to Guitar Hero 2. The most interesting song in Guitar Hero 2 was a song called Jordan, which was written by a guitarist named Buckethead. It goes by Buckethead because he actually goes on stage with the Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket over his head.
Okay.
He replaced Slash in the band Guns N' Roses when Slash left the band. So the guy was quite well known at the time. But he was young, so he played the game, Guitar Hero 1, and then he just called us out of the booth, said, hey, I'm going to give you a song for Guitar Hero 2, and it's going to be the hardest song that's in the game. So he wrote a song specifically with a super hard guitar part. And he called it Jordan because he said this will be the hardest guitar solo in Guitar Hero 2. So we got this song, we released it, and that sort of made some waves in the music world about like, hey, Buckethead released this song, not on an album, but in a video game.
Okay.
And then that led us to 3, where suddenly, like, I think 70-something% of the songs that they gave us were original recordings. We went to the Sex Pistols, went back in studio to re-record 3 songs for us. So those were brand new recordings because the labels had lost all the Sex Pistols original recordings. And so all of a sudden, like, people were willing to go back to the studio to record a song for our game. And 2 years ago, like, nobody would even give us the original recording.
So people start like releasing songs on Guitar Hero. Like,
Yes.
Any famous, any notable albums or people?
Well, so we had a few things that were funny for Guitar Hero 3 was we went to license a song from a band called Living Color, and they said, hold on, the guitar solo on that song isn't very hard. We're going to re-record a version of it with a harder guitar solo just for this game, right? And so they did that, and we thought, oh, that's interesting. And the Sex Pistols re-recorded their music for us. That was interesting. And then we were approached to do a special project. Fascinating. The band Metallica had always wanted to be in a video game. And so they thought, hey, we should do, and we wanted to work with them on an entire game called Guitar Hero Metallica. And they said, we would like this game released on the same day that we released an album. So we want this entire album. They're working on an album at the time called Death Magnetic. And they said, we want the album to be the game version of that album on the same day that we released the album. And we thought, oh, that could be challenging. And we set off. It was a very difficult schedule, but we did it as a downloadable. We couldn't get it into the stores in time.
Mm-hmm.
But so people, the same day they released that album, you could also download the Guitar Hero version of Death Magnetic into Guitar Hero. And that was the first time that had ever been done, where somebody released an album as well as a video game of that entire album. And so we did that. And their manager told us later on that actually that album in Guitar Hero was their 3rd best-selling outlet. They said Walmart sold the most, Best Buy sold the 2nd most, and the 3rd most was in Guitar Hero.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty funny. And I think you mentioned Taylor Swift, but also when you said you started like bringing music to America from like Asia with like the rock and roll and like, feel like a rock star instead with like rock and metal. But then, I mean, you guys shifted out after like Guitar Hero 2, 3, you guys shifted to other songs also, like other genres. How was that?
Yeah, so, we were looking at trying to expand our market, especially to Europe. So we started looking at different European languages, Spanish, French, Italian. So we started including a few songs for those territories. We started looking at other genres to build entire games around. So we worked on a game called DJ Hero, which was based on hip hop and EDM music at the time. And so we started looking at expanding both Guitar Hero into new territories as well as expanding into new genres. We looked at Guitar Hero as the rock and metal game, and EDM and hip hop. We thought we need a different game for that because that's very different than guitar and drum. And so we built an entire different game for that.
Okay, nice. And that's all within Activision?
Yes, that was all within our time at Activision.
And you said you spent 4 years there, 6 years?
We spent 4 years there, from 2006 to 2010.
And then how was that, like, after? How was leaving Activision? Like, what you and your brother did after? Yeah.
Leaving Activision was, it was interesting. Our time had kind of, we had been there a lot. It was super intense. I think we made 10 different versions of Guitar Hero besides the annual release. We made some others like the Metallica, Van Halen. We just made so many different Guitar Hero and DJ Hero games that honestly was like we were a little burnt out. And so we left to pursue some other things. Towards the end of our time there, we started seeing like people were playing games on mobile phones. People were playing games at that time on Facebook, and we started seeing these things, and it was like, oh, this is kind of interesting, especially for somebody who's kind of an entrepreneur at heart. And so we kind of left to pursue a few of those new ideas.
Okay, I mean, yeah, let's talk about those new ideas. But just before, real quick, how was working with your brother actually? Like, how was starting a company and working?
Yeah. So it's my brother and I, we worked together for many years, and it was very intense, right? And so I always say that like the great thing about working with your brother, like I knew him my whole life. I know how he thinks. I know how he reacts. So almost before he would say something, I could kind of guess what he was going to say about anything. So, and there's a level of trust there, right? And familiarity. So that part was great. The part that was not so great was we would argue like we were still 8 years old, like in our parents' house. And we just argued all the time about things. And because he's my brother, I don't have to be tactful. I don't have to be polite, right? Like he would say something, I'd say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And then we start arguing, right? And that was not a good way to run a business, is to always be arguing. So there was definitely good and bad to working with my brother.
Okay, are you the older one?
So I'm older by 3 years.
Okay, and he also did Berkeley, your brother, no?
Yeah, he and I were both at Berkeley together.
Okay, nice. So what did he study?
He studied computer science, actually.
Oh, so he was the technical.
Yeah,
and then you were the...
So what was funny was when we started the company, he was working on sort of the technical development and I was working on the business side. And then when we started building hardware, because I had been in China and I knew the sort of Chinese factories and I spoke Chinese, then I kind of took over product development because it was all hardware. And then he kind of took over managing the business side. And so our roles kind of flipped midway through the company.
Okay.
It's a small company, so we didn't have a lot of people to do these things. So we had to do them ourselves.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's funny. And then I think you said after you guys left the Guitar Hero, you also did new things on the gaming industry, like
yes,
always been an entrepreneur, So like, yeah, if you could share more about that, what you did after. You have it's called Blue Goji.
Yeah. So we started another company with another friend, Coleman Fung in Texas. And that idea was to bring a lot of video game design and concepts to health and fitness. And so we were building games that would help people exercise, make exercise more interesting. We also started another company called Green Throttle. That was really, I started that with a couple of friends. One was a high school friend. And that was to bring console-like games to Android on television. Because at that time, there was a lot of talk about Android and iOS perhaps coming to TVs. And I thought, oh, we could build console-like video game experiences, not mobile single-player games with touch, but like a console-like game to television that would run on Android. And we ended up, that company didn't, because Android never really came to TV, but we ended up selling that company and the technology to Google. So we worked on a few different companies. We worked on a karaoke product with another ex-colleague. It was called Singtrix. So we worked on several different companies. I guess at heart, when you're an entrepreneur, you kind of keep starting companies. And over the 23 years that after I graduated college, I started 7 companies. And out of those 7, like everybody's only ever heard of one.
Okay.
And so I say, like, as a serial entrepreneur, that's what you do. You start companies. Some of them make it, some of them don't. And then you just keep doing it.
Okay, nice. And you also start investing in companies because that's...
Yes.
And that's because that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do also. So how was that? I mean, going from one side to the other, and
so I would say as an investor, so like when you're an entrepreneur, and especially if you had an exit, people come to you to hopefully invest in their companies, and generally I try to be supportive. I'm not generally don't invest because I think like I'm going to make a lot of money. I invest because I think it's an interesting person trying to build an interesting product and something I can help them do. And so a lot of my investments are kind of, I call it like paying it forward to people, like, because we had a lot of help from angel investors when we got started, and so I try to do the same and try to help new entrepreneurs.
Okay, any like industry specifics you invest or just anything cool that someone's building?
Well, because of my background, I get mostly two kinds of entrepreneurs. One is, of course, video game entrepreneurs. And so I'm on the board of a few companies, including one that makes the Five Nights at Freddy's games called Steel Wool. Another company in New York called Velen. They made a game called Mario Kart Live with Nintendo. The other type of company that I get introduced to a lot in terms of deal flow is hardware companies, because we built a lot of hardware for our Guitar Hero games. So I meet a lot of hardware entrepreneurs, and I would say most of the entrepreneurs I meet are in either games or hardware.
Okay. And I mean, since you touched a little bit on that, I was curious, how is the gaming industry today? How it changed since Guitar Hero and also like with AI and everything? How's AI in
Yes.
gaming?
Yeah. Well, gaming, I would say two huge trends since I was in the business, or since I sort of semi-retired. I would say one was the emergence of all of these developing nations who've played a ton of games, especially mobile. So that's China, in Brazil, right? All of Latin America. All of a sudden, like they started playing a lot of games, especially mobile games. So that was new and fascinating. And these games had very different business models, free to play mostly games.
Hmm.
So that was huge. And then the second I would say is like these new categories, primarily, especially mobile, was this entirely new category that came basically out of nowhere and became a huge category market for games. But as you talk about AI is interesting. I think it's interesting in the way that, at least right now, it looks different than, say, mobile or the developing countries, because it's not a new market opening up, right? It's not like it's a new technology platform where suddenly millions of new people will be playing games through this platform, or it's not like billions of people in different parts of the world are suddenly now have the technology to play video games. So it looks a little bit different, but I think it's having a huge impact on video game development, and that's where I think is thus far what I see most of the impact from AI on.
Okay. And how does hardware fit in that story? Because I mean, obviously hardware for like AI, like data centers and like
Right.
semiconductors, like the infrastructure. But like when AI is becoming the main player in the world, like how is hardware doing in just in
Yeah.
general? Yeah.
Well, it's kind of funny because I built all kinds of hardware, from the game controllers, even a lot of our people, because of the experience, in VR, some of the early VR, like Oculus's first hardware engineer, their first COO used to all work for us at RedOctane. So we had seen a lot of things in people building hardware that could be used for video games. Um, and those are very consumer facing. This time around with AI, it's entirely sort of in the data center. It's invisible to most
Yeah.
people, right? Most people have never been in a data center, um, like let alone a fab. Like it's not possible to go visit a TSMC. I've been on the outside of TSMC fabs. I've never been inside a
Okay.
TSMC fab, and so a lot of this hardware is incredibly complex and invisible to people. But what I will say is that for us in the video game business, like a lot of this hardware started with the video game industry. So like GPUs, before they were being used for this, were just being used to play video
Yeah.
games,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so we were playing around with GPUs forever and ever, and all these decades of development in GPUs was almost entirely for the video game industry,
Hmm.
right? And we were the people that kind of pushed GPUs to the limit, pushed for improvements, pushed for people to understand 3D accelerated graphics and what's useful for that, right? And then that was before anybody figured out GPUs could be useful in this new framework of like training LLMs and using neural nets and all that, right? But a lot of this, the origins, I would say the first 2 decades of the origins of a lot of this hardware tech had its roots in like the video game market, um, and just for some mysterious reason, the whole world seemed to like turn towards GPUs and say, "Hey, that's that's the future right there." Is we use GPUs for self-driving cars. We use GPUs for data centers, And in the meanwhile, we were like, I don't know, 20 years ago, there was nobody that cared about GPU. Even 10 years ago, no one cared about GPUs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I think you said a little bit about like this trend of like people go more to mobile and less hardware and hardware becoming invisible. But I mean, I think since Guitar Hero, there hasn't been like a big game that like uses hardware, to play with.
Yes.
Like, I mean, maybe had a Wii and Guitar
Yes.
Hero that use hardware. But I mean, I was wondering just why you think that happened, or if you see any hardware coming back in the future, or even maybe VR. Like, I think VR was a big thing back
Right.
in the day. I mean, like 10,
Yes.
5 years ago, maybe.
Yes.
But then the glasses are, I don't know, too big. Or what are your views on that, on VR and
Yeah.
hardware?
So I think in terms of platforms, right, a lot of hardware platforms, what I find is, so I would put mobile, I would put VR and AR in that category, is sometimes the first applications people think about are video games, right? And that was true definitely for mobile. At least the first big money-making applications people thought about were like video games. So if you think about whatever, Candy Crush, or the games that Supercell makes, a lot of these sort of early on pushed, Angry Birds really pushed people to use mobile phones for something besides like email and phone calls, and created an entire economy where people were spending money. Same thing with early VR. The guys that I mentioned make the game Five Nights at Freddy's. Some of that early success was in VR. And so video games, I always say we don't create the technology, but we get consumers to use the technology.
Okay.
And people are willing to spend money on video games. Um, and I would also say that video games pushes consumer adoption of technologies in fundamental ways. Like, the world, for some reason, 20 years, 30 years into the internet, the internet is still 2D and text-based. And to me, I always get pissed whenever I see that, because I think like we should be in 3D.
Holograms.
Yeah, by now, right? Like, and we've been living in a 3D world in video games for decades and decades. I don't know why the rest of the world still isn't doing 3D.
Oh, you just mean in general, not even holograms, just like on the phone.
Yeah, like it could be in 3D on the phone or on your
Okay.
PC screen, right?
Okay.
Laptop. Like, why aren't things in 3Ds? Why aren't things graphical, like instead of text-based,
Yeah.
right? Like all these things. Why isn't there sound? Why isn't there movement? And so there's a lot of things that video games have pushed. The idea of, you talk about a Wiimote or guitar. These are different input devices. Like, why is decades later are we still using keyboard and mouse? Right? There've got to be better ways to put things, right, into computers and phones than keyboard and mouse. I guess there's touchscreens, but a lot of these were kind of pioneered by video games.
Yeah. And why do you think like metaverse, the Apple, the glasses, like why did like didn't work or like fail or didn't like live to the hype it had before?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I really liked it. It was the first time that I saw the Valve version of a VR headset was where I thought like, wow, it'd be fun to make a game in this, right? And
Yeah.
but I think the technology ultimately, looking back, is it's a bit cumbersome, like to cover your eyes. Um, it is also a high barrier in terms of setting up. There were some technical challenges. It's very easy to get motion sickness in these. So there were, I feel like, a lot of little things that people couldn't overcome. And whereas like a mobile phone, when it first came into use, was just like so easy to use. But VR never, I feel like, got to the point where people felt like, oh, this is so much easier to use than the other.
It's more inconvenient than convenience.
Yeah. In fact, you had to go through a lot of work to play a VR game.
Yeah. And what do you think is I mean, you said usually video games don't like create technologies, but they show to users.
Right.
But what is the future? What do you think is the future of the video gaming industry with AI, with hardware, or just in general?
Yeah. So I think, AI will allow people to create a lot of content, right? And video games is an area where people are always looking for new content and looking to create new content.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one area where AI, in terms of content creation, like what I tell people is like, so AI can make it easy to generate code, but the demand for code can also be infinitely expandable, right? So like, it may be 10 times easier to create an app, a mobile app, but it's also like we could create 10 mobile apps, and like, people who are working on apps today, it's not like they ran out of ideas for features. They just had a whole list of features that were like, well, we don't have enough engineers to implement these features, so you're trying to develop them slowly. Now, if you can develop them quickly, but you have more ideas, then the demand for software also becomes very, right? And so I think the kind of the race is on, and video games is one of those areas where like I feel like there's almost endless demand for new kinds of video games and new experiences, in a way that like there may not be endless demand for I don't know, banking, like apps, right, for new features in banking apps, but there is for video games. So I think that's an area. I also think AI as a UX problem, if you think about it, um, the approach still is largely like I type and chat with a chatbot in 2D text, right? And if you think about all the sci-fi movies, like AI's embodiment is not a chat box.
Yeah.
It's some kind of almost like
Robot,
human-like,
yeah.
or a
3D,
robot.
yeah.
Yeah, right? And like that's the kind of stuff that video games is really good at, is like making you feel like you're interacting with a character in the game that's a human, or something else that's interesting. Like it may not be a human, but it's a character that's interesting to interact with. So I feel like that UX experience AI has not quite solved for the consumer side, which is like, how do you want somebody as a human being to interact with AI, right? And if you're telling me it's in a little chat box, I would say like, then you're never going to maximize AI for.
But in video games, it's still like the 3D is still in software. No, it's not like actual physical hardware. You think like that? You think that what should come to like? You think that we should have physical hardware like robots with AI in the future, or like you're talking about again 3D within our phones,
Yeah.
or 3D within the PC?
Yeah. So certainly there are already robots that are being sort of built that are trained with LLMs to do human-like things. So I think one is that the approach to building robots, I advise a company that's building an autonomous cleaning, like industrial vacuum robot. And they started probably 7-8 years ago, and the approach to robotics is completely different today than when they started. So I do think robots, physical manifestations, physical products that use AI is an interesting approach. But I think even in the digital world, the idea that AI appears to you, again, as a chat box, right? A box where you input text, to me seems like this is like just, like kindergarten level UX thinking, right? That like how AI should interact with humans. Eventually, if you like, again, think about all the sci-fi movies, right? AI is not a box. It is some embodiment that we haven't figured out what it is yet. But I think video games can go a lot to inform people on like how that can be.
Okay, I think you said it's pretty interesting. You said like we haven't figured out what it is yet. And just out of curiosity, like, do you think like robots in the future are gonna look like humans just because we're humans, or they're gonna have like other weird shapes that maybe are more like useful for like I don't know, tasks, like daily tasks?
So as a game developer, right, or a game maker, I always find it that like we can play around with a lot of things. So within the game, like for instance, I would say like what's an example? Some of the sports games are probably the best examples of it. So you can make a golf game like EA makes Tiger Woods Golf, and that's realistic sims that has players that look like real professional golf players, right? And you're playing golf courses that are exact replicas in the digital world of a real golf course. Then you can turn around and make something like Nintendo does with Mario Golf. And it's these fantastical golf courses that could not possibly, like you're hitting and it's bouncing off 10 mushrooms, right? And crazy stuff like that. And that's a fantastical interpretation of golf. And I think in video games, we use the imagination to imagine like, what if it's not an exact human? Maybe that's more comfortable for people, right? What if it's something that kind of has arms and legs, but it's not human, but you interact with it as if it's a friend, like it looks like a friendly alien that will come and talk to you and you can interact with it. Maybe that's friendlier than like if it appears to you like it's a strange looking human being. That's
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And are you currently working on anything, I mean, related to this or just in general, like related to gaming, entertainment? What are you currently doing?
So my passion these days is working with students here at Berkeley. I say like I like working with entrepreneurs, but in particular, I've really found it interesting to work with people who are just thinking about whether they want to become entrepreneurs or not. And because I feel like at that pivotal moment, um, like, you know, you don't, a lot of them don't really know where to find resources or how to think about like, oh, should I, when you're not, when you're 18 years old and you're thinking about, well, I don't know, should I go be an engineer and work on cars at Ford or Tesla, or should I go and be an entrepreneur and start a maybe a hardware company um, that like they don't even know what this path looks like. They kind
Mhm.
of know what the other path, the first path looks like, but they don't know. What we try to do is like I try to come in and give them one idea of like, hey, you can have a career as an entrepreneur. And most people I talk to, when you're 17, 18, 19 years old, you don't really think about entrepreneurship as a career. And that's what I hopefully am able to give them is this idea that they can be a career, they can have a career as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, no, that's very nice. And so, how was it like coming back to Berkeley and after you graduate and starting your own entrepreneurship class? You've been doing what since 2019, I think here. So yeah, how's this coming back? Being a professor in the college you're student once. How's that?
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy to think about. Sometimes you walk around, it's like, oh, this classroom looks the same. But I like the classroom environment. We've had, this is the seventh year we've been teaching this. I remember my co-instructor, Umer Khan, and I looked at, after the first 5 years, that's roughly 500 students out of the first 5 years. We had 5 YC founders who took our class right out of that 500. And so we're very happy with that. I think that's a good result.
Yeah.
Hopefully there'll be more in the future. But at least we look back and we said like, okay, so some of them actually took the class and then decided to go down this path. Um, and so I think it's incredibly rewarding to be able to see that 5 years later, to look back and see because when we're going through the first couple of years, we're thinking like, I don't know if anybody gets any of this. Like, do they care about any of this? And to see later on that, like, yeah,
Yeah.
at least some people do.
Nice. And how's the class? Like, how's the class structured? And
Mm.
how did you came with this idea for your class? Because I'm taking the class right now, and it's a very interesting class.
Oh,
Like, probably the most interesting class I've taken in Berkeley so far. But
oh,
yeah, how did you
thank you, thank you,
develop it?
thank you for saying that. So the class is structured basically. It's 2 hours a week, 1 hour of instruction and lecture, 1 hour of a guest speaker who comes in and tells you about their experience as an entrepreneur. We try to find different people in different fields to give people a broad exposure of entrepreneurship in different industries. As far as what we teach, I call it like we teach basically the language of entrepreneurship, so that when you want to present an idea as an entrepreneur, there are certain things that you must present, and you must present them in terminology that other entrepreneurs or investors understand. So when you talk about a go-to-market strategy, everybody knows what that means. If somebody asks you, what's your TAM, total addressable market, you need to know what that means and how to answer that, right? And there are financing terms, like if somebody asks, like, are you raising Series A or Series B? Like, you need to know what those mean. And if you see liquidation preference, you need to know what that means. So there's a whole language of entrepreneurship that there's no reason why people
Yeah.
need to know this except to be an entrepreneur. So we try to teach that, so when people leave, whenever they want to start a company and they have the ideas, they know how to present the ideas in the language of entrepreneurship.
Okay, that's very nice. And I mean, besides the lingo, do you think you can teach someone how to be an entrepreneur, or you're born with it?
Oh, that is always a tough question, I think. um, I know by now, I can say I got this far. So we're about roughly 700 students into this class experiment. I have a good feel now when I talk to some students where I think, wow, I don't think this person is going to graduate. I think
You're gonna
as
drop
soon as
out.
they get an
Yeah.
idea, they're going to be off and running, starting a company. Um, and so there are some people I feel like, for whatever reason, really young, like they've decided this is what they want to do.
Hmm.
But I would say for most of the other students that we've had that became entrepreneurs, probably 70, 80% of them have told me that, like, yeah, I didn't really think about it until we came in and college and then took the class. And so I think, you know, I met a few people that seemed like they were born entrepreneurs, but I think most people kind of develop.
Okay. Were you born an entrepreneur, or?
I would say I felt, if you asked me when I was in college, I would have said I was a born history professor.
Okay. And well, I had this one more question about entrepreneurship. You started like right after college or right after graduate, and you
Yes.
said that people, even today, people don't see like the clear path of entrepreneurship. Like it's a hard like path to see.
Oh.
But I was wondering, how do you think it was different to like start a company back then as a student, and like how is it starting a company like right now as a student? Because you see a lot of people who drop out to go
Yes.
to IC and
Yes.
a lot of incubators. You
Yes.
see, it's very common with the internet also. How's like the different
Yes.
entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because it is, it's night and day, the difference, right? So back then there were no classes to take. And now there's a class in almost every college on entrepreneurship. Back then there was no Skydeck. There's several incubators now on campus. There were no incubators on campus, right? Back then, or today, there are several. There's Skydeck, there's Citrus Foundry, there's a Baker Bioingenuity Hub for life sciences, right? Just on the Berkeley campus, there's 4 or 5 different incubators. So you have an entire support network. There's a program, a Skydeck, where students can intern at startups to learn what that's like. It's called the ACE program, right? That, like, none of that existed when I was here. And back then, the investors wouldn't really believe you if you're a college student trying to start a company. They would say, like, no, you need to work 5 years before you can start a company. So I think the environment has changed to where an 18-year-old coming in, you know, the first year with an idea to start a company will be taken very seriously by the school, by investors, by customers. And that just was not the case when I was an undergrad.
And do you think it's a big risk, like, you know, dropping out, starting a company when you're 18, 19, and then it doesn't work? Like, what do you do after? Like, go back to college? Like, you don't have like a 5-year career you can go back to.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
So that's the funny thing was, when those first 2 students came in, the first 2 YC founders that we had in the class, they're actually freshmen when they took the class. They met working on the finals project. Then they started a company beginning of their sophomore year, got accepted into YC, and then they dropped out by the end of sophomore year. But when they told me they got accepted, I said, oh, you need to talk to your parents, because YC, once they invest, will not let you be a part-time entrepreneur and part-time student. They expect you to be full-time entrepreneurs, right? That's why investors are investing. And so you need to talk to them about dropping out. And I thought, like, that's probably best that if you drop out early, because, like, if they spent 3 years of tuition and then you tell them you're going to drop out, they're going to say, like, oh man, why couldn't you have done this like in year 1, right?
Yeah, get them in and invest in the company.
Yeah, like you couldn't have told me this before I invested, you know, a couple $100,000 in your college education. So I think in many ways, for young people, the earlier it is, the less risky I think it is. But these days also, it's very painless for people to come back and forth. So one of those 2 first YC founders, that company didn't make it. And one of those founders did come back to school to finish her degree. The other one then started another company with someone else, raised money, and he's still out there doing it. So the path to come back to a university is a lot easier than it was before. So I think the penalty, right, to drop out of school to start a company is much less than it was before.
Okay, makes sense. And Charles, we're getting to the end of the podcast here. Super nice having you. But before we finish, I'd just like to ask you a quick question. So just like rapid question and just give me an answer. So a book you read recently, or a book you like?
Yeah. So a book, a little backstory to this. There's a book called The Sympathizer, won the 2016 Pulitzer Prize for Best Fiction, written by a guy named Viet Thanh Nguyen. Viet actually was a classmate of mine here at Berkeley. We used to run around protesting together. He's now a professor at USC, but he wrote this book about the Vietnamese refugees. It's a fiction about the Vietnamese refugees that came to the United States and what they were doing, like trying to retake Vietnam, and the spies that were sent by the Viet Cong to spy on them here in the United States. A fascinating book. Viet is a good friend. I recommend it. Not just because he's a good friend, but it won the
Good
Pulitzer
book,
Prize for
okay.
Best Fiction. It got turned into an HBO series, so if you don't want to read the book, you can watch that. It stars Robert Downey Jr. In the series. So that book, The Sympathizer, I highly recommend.
A movie?
So a movie I watched recently. This is interesting for me on many levels. So there is a movie that was just recently released, an animation. I love animation, by the way. I watch a lot of animation, as you can imagine. Called Neja 2. It's a sequel to Neja, and it's a Chinese movie, an animation, a cartoon. It's a very Chinese story. There are English subtitles. I went and saw it in the theater in the United States. This movie, very few people have heard about, but it has become a complete phenomenon. It is the highest grossing animated movie of all time in just within, I think, 6 months of release, and almost entirely on ticket sales in China. It has outgrossed all of the Pixar movies, all of the Disney cartoons. It's become the number one. It has recently moved up to, I think, number 5 top grossing movie of all time. It passed Avengers Infinity War. And the box office is tremendous. And so I find it fascinating on many levels. I went to watch it in the theater with my wife and daughter. It's kind of, to me, always like an example of like how many amazing things can come out of different parts of the world that you never expect. Maybe the next one will come out of Brazil, you don't know.
Yeah.
But like to see something like that come out of China, to me, it's fascinating. And it's a really good movie.
Yeah, no, Brazil just won an Oscar for a movie.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
still
that's
here.
right.
Very
Yeah,
good movie.
yeah.
Okay, a song. It's
A song.
Yeah.
Okay. So a song. I go back to it's kind of funny. When I first came to the United States, my family moved to New York, right? And there were 2 big things that were happening in that time in New York, and when I grew here. So one was a rock and roll band called Kiss. So the first album I ever bought was a Kiss album. It was rock, and they were these guys that had like paint on their faces, and I'm sure my parents were horrified. Thought like this was a huge mistake bringing them to the United States. But they had a song back then called "Destroyer" on the album that I listened to a lot. Freaked out my parents. And then the second thing was rap, which I'm sure also didn't make my parents happy. And I started listening to a lot of rap growing up. And one of the first rap songs I ever heard, Sugar Hill Gang, I had a song called Dynamite. And these were like just songs of my very first childhood years in the United States that have stayed with me ever since.
Okay, a Guitar Hero song now.
Okay. So, yeah. My favorite Guitar Hero song that I ever played, this was a song, I'll throw 2 in there, because the first one was, I used this song it was called Crossroads by Cream, which was Eric Clapton's band. And I used that song to basically level up from kind of beginner level to expert. And I sat with the QA group and just played that song hour after hour, day after day, so much that like after all, one of the other QA people came over and said, "Hey, Charles, we don't mind you playing the game here, but can you play another song? Because we're kind of sick of listening to that one song." So that like Crossroads, that song stuck with me. And then the other one, I did the same thing when we make drums. It was The Middle by Jimmy Eats World. And I still, whenever I hear that song, I can imagine the drum track. I see it like scrolling down in my eyes.
So you're a great Guitar Hero player, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I have a funny story about that. I was, for Guitar Hero 2, by the time 2 came out, I was the only person in the company besides the QA people, right, who could play expert level. And the QA people, that's their job. So they're all playing expert level. And I was the only other person. So one day, we're at E3 showing Guitar Hero 2. PR people asked me, "Hey, we have a VIP, can you show them expert? They want to see expert level. Can you show it to them?" So I said, "Sure." And they said, "The QA people are all busy, so you're the only one that can play expert." So I went up to this room. I walk up, there's 2 big bodyguards outside the room. I was like, "Oh, wow, this is something." And so I walk into the room, and it was Steven Spielberg and his son Max and his daughter. And his son Max played Guitar Hero 1, and he wanted to see Guitar Hero 2 on expert level. So I got to sit in that room with Steven Spielberg and play Guitar Hero 2 with his son Max and walk him through the game. And I credited all that because I practiced many hours of Guitar Hero to where I could play expert level, and I was the only one who could show him that.
Okay. A video game?
So my favorite video game, the one that I have spent the most hours on, sort of very seminal in my youth. Sounds almost silly, but Super Mario World.
Super, great one.
Yeah,
Great one.
that was the game that made me sort of really love video games.
What's better, Mario or Guitar Hero?
Oh, well, I'm partial, so I'd say Guitar Hero. But Mario is a very, very special game.
Yeah, I know. Mario Kart.
Yeah.
And Charles, just to finish here, a quote or like a lesson you'd like to pass on to people who are watching the podcast?
A quote. My friend of mine who was a VC, he was actually my high school classmate's dad. He was a mentor to me. He always told me when we were very first starting and we were having a lot of difficulties, he said, just don't let this company die. Smart people will ultimately find a way to be successful, but you cannot let the company die. Do whatever you can, right? And so I always carried that around. Just don't let the company die, right? And we eventually found a way through all the struggle to make it. But that's what he always. That for some reason when he said that to us, it stuck with me all these years. Just don't let it die.
Okay, keep swimming. Just keep swimming.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching one more episode of the BSV podcast series. Very interesting episode of Charles here talking about entrepreneurship and Guitar Hero. And yeah, stay tuned for the next episodes and for the conference that's coming here in April. And yeah, Charles, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Mate.
Yeah, student class Wednesday.
Yes. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye. Thank you.